Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Traversing the Stars podcast. How are my loyal listeners? Thank you for your continued support. And as always, hit the subscribe button, everybody. An amazing show for you because board of the mothership is Charlie Stickney. You know him as the co-publisher of Scout Comics. He's now the writer of Glarien. Now come join me as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Stickney. Thank you so much for coming to the Traversing the Stars podcast.
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much.
It's really my pleasure, sir. You are the co-publisher of Scout, which is a very big deal, so I'm glad to talk with you.
Oh, well, it's always a matter of perspective. I'm glad that feels important to you. I am really excited to be on your podcast. So for me, that's a really big deal. How's that?
Oh, thank you so much. But we'll call it even then, even though technically I think you win, but that's okay. So I always start off with a question of inspiration. So what inspired your love for comics and who your earliest influences?
So, my inspiration as creative influences, or
Your either your love for comics or your creative influence.
well, I think, for me, those are two separate things. When I was very young, I had this gigantic box of comics, and I think it started growing because my parents were going on trips with me, and they wanted something to keep me quiet. So they used to sell at the convenience stores and also at places like Bradley's, which was like a pre-Target. They used to have these collector's packs, which would have 2 or 3 comics in them. So I had a bunch of those. I had some old Wonder Woman comics, some old Bratman Brave and the Bold, a couple of SpiderMan Marvel team-ups, anything that they could sort of bring out on the plane to keep me going. So I had, like I said, this gigantic cardboard box where everything got all mashed up because I didn't really care about collecting at all. And I just loved reading them. And then I had like some of these old Western comics. I don't even know where they got them, but like the box was there. And whenever I needed a place in my room to just sort of go and clear my head, I would just go dig through the box and read some books. And then when I got a little bit older, when I was in middle school, I was a big Transformers fan, as many people were in the 80s. And all of a sudden, I saw again one of those 3-packs of Transformer comics, and it was reprints of Transformers 1, 2, and 3. And in Transformers number 3, there's Spider-Man. For whatever reason, they were trying to do some kind of crossover, and it worked. Because I saw Spider-Man, he's in this black costume. I was like, what's going on with Spider-Man? Why does he have a black costume? And so then I had to go find out. So I went to a bookstore, because back then comic books were in bookstores. And I went to the spinner rack and I picked up, I think it was Amazing Spider-Man 287. And it was like in the middle of this thing called the Gang War that they were doing. And Daredevil was looming over Spider-Man saying, "Stay down, Spider-Man." And it was like, it just blew my mind. And so then I started collecting forward, and then I found out at comic book shops and started going backwards. And a year and a half later, I was getting 50 comics a month.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because back then there was also these subscription services where you could get things cheaply as long as you could wait. And so I really kind of dove deep into comics. And it was a huge part of my adolescence and college and high school, where, just as comics were starting to evolve, I was evolving along with them. And so for me, it all goes back to kind of like Transformers in as a gateway drug. And then me kind of discovering the good stuff on my own. So
well, that's fantastic. Hopefully head on to some of the combos, especially the 280 Spider-Man. They're probably worth quite a bit of money, so hopefully you held on.
Well, yeah, so I do have a sizable collection because at the time I also thought maybe I should go backwards. So that was what I would get at the comic book conventions. I think my collection of Amazing Spider-Man starts in the 170s now and just goes up through like 400 or something. Back, that was what I loved collecting. It made me happy as a kid.
That's fantastic. I really like how you remember so much of it and your gateway drugs of Transformers, which as a kid growing up, Transformers was my thing too. Mostly complete G1, but Rodimus Prime, Cup, love those characters, Galvatron.
Like for me, I think it was the first generation for sure.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, because I missed the Transformers movie, the next season came back and all the characters were gone, and I had no idea what had happened. And I think in general, with comics like at a company like Marvel or DC, that's a little bit of a problem in terms of you have a story and you have a set of characters, and after every 5 to 8 years, things kind of change, right?
Hmm.
New writers come in, there's new edicts from the company, they revamp things. And so I think sustainability long term is really difficult for licensed IP because there's all these different reasons why the story needs to change and new voices coming in and telling them. So, for me personally right now, I really appreciate either the longer runs, like you look at the Chris Claremont run on X-Men,
Hmm.
or Peter David's original run on the Incredible Hulk, things where you had one singular voice telling a story for a long time, and it gives you a reason to stay invested. And that's why I think indie comics have been such a boom over the last 10 to 15 years, because a lot of people who love Spider-Man, who love Batman, loved a version of it, and after
Hmm.
6 or 7, 8 years, it doesn't feel like they're Spider-Man or they're Batman anymore. And so they're looking for something else with a little bit more consistency. And then you find, Robert Kirkman doing The Walking Dead for 10 years, right?
Yeah.
And every issue is still Kirkman. So it's his vision. It's a unified vision. Same thing with stuff that Brian K. Vaughan has been doing, the Saga. That's what I love about creator-owned comics, that you have a singular vision, a voice, sort of driving that story forward, and you can make the universe as big or as long as you want it to be.
I agree, and I think interesting thing that when you're talking about Spider-Man, how you have a run for, I think you said, like, from 170 to through the 400s, and the one thing I thought about was the numbering now for Marvel. I don't know if I can keep track. I think they're celebrating Amazing Fantasy number 1,000. I'm trying to do the math in my head. I'm like, I don't know if there's 1,000 issues of Amazing Spider-Man plus Amazing Fantasy to equal 1,000, but whatever you want with your numbering, just, I guess it is what it is.
That because they might have enough. Because I'm just trying to think of like I stopped as a regular collector of Marvel comics sometime in the mid '90s when they were up to 400. So now we're here 20 years later, with all the multiple crossovers and things like that. It feels like they could have done another 600 issues of Spider-Man somewhere.
I just always find the numbering confusing, because sometimes they just jump in with a big zero number. I'm like, I don't remember. I know we had like 9 volumes in between, but I don't remember getting quite that high. But sure.
Right, right. Yeah, but I do think I mean, the Spider-Man, like I even saw it in the time that I was collecting. Like the Incredible Hulk was different
Mm,
because Peter David was really on there for 10 years writing that title, and there weren't so many spin-offs, so it was just a singular story. And
mm,
so for me, that was my favorite thing to read, followed closely by the X-Men, because you had Chris Claremont again seeding things for years and telling a singular story. I love the character of Spider-Man, but it kept changing and it kept feeling different with new artists and new writers coming in. But when I went back to my Marvel Masterworks, what was really amazing was the first 5 or 6 years of Spider-Man, when it was basically just Stan Lee
mm.
creating the universe, creating that characters with some very talented artists to co-create, I guess. But it was again a singular unified vision.
Oh, I agree. I think one thing I do love about Usagi Yojimbo, I mean, Stan Sakai, 200 something issues. It's a genius run, and I like just watching it unfold. And every issue feels 100% Stan Sakai.
Yeah, exactly. And if you like that, you know what you're getting.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So one thing that you're the co-publisher of Scout Comics. So is that what inspired the formation of Scout Comics for you? And how does Scout Comics differentiate itself from the other comic book companies?
Well, so I came on board to Scout Comics. Scout Comics predated my time there. I was actually spending most of my time doing my own creator-owned title, White Ash, and I was doing that in the Kickstarter space, which I think has been a real boon to independent creators everywhere, giving them the means to find your fans directly, to build a fan base, to create enough revenue to be able to create a comic. And White Ash had been growing rather quickly and becoming quite successful. And Scout approached me about distributing White Ash. about putting it out into the direct market, the comic book market, an audience that I hadn't been part of at all at that point. And so we had some, we had some back and forth and decided it would be a good fit. And so originally I just came as a creator and they were going to be putting out my title. But then I started talking a little bit behind the scenes about how they did this and how they did that, and maybe I could help them with this, because I wanted the launch for White Ash to be as good as it possibly could be. So I was helping them build the infrastructure in some different places. And this was all happening around the time that the current publisher, Jim Pruitt, was looking to move on to some other things. And so that turned into a conversation where they asked if I wanted to sort of step up to the plate, because I had been self-publishing White Ash, but that was growing into its own kind of line and universe onto itself. So I had been doing the job of publisher for my own things, and so they thought, let's see if this would be a fit. And so that was, roughly 3 years ago. I've been helping grow the company since then. In terms of how Scout stands out, I mean, I think it's always a difficult question. Like, what's the difference between, say, Scout and Aftershock, and what's the difference between Vault and AWA and any of these smaller companies that are doing either creator-owned books or short runs of new series, and that comes back down to branding. And I think depending on which company you're looking at, each of them have their own mandates and areas of the market they're trying to hit. And Scout really, like, if you look at this name Scout, is leading you someplace new, right? Or helping you navigate a space that you haven't been in before. And so, that's kind of what we're trying to do with our share of the market, is help readers find new voices and new talent who haven't maybe had a showcase before, or help more established creators find, connect them to a new fan base. So we're trying to forge new ground both ways, and build a group of readers who are looking for something that's different, something new, for singular voices who have visions that we want to help cultivate and put out into the market, and give them a broader platform.
So one thing that has been pretty seismic in recent memory for the comic book industry was the COVID epidemic. Comic book stores shut down for a while. There was a lot of distribution problems because of, obviously, people not leaving, the house, stores being closed. So how did Scout position itself to maneuver and survive what that was? And what advice can you give publishers still trying to climb out of what happened during the last basically 2 years?
Well, I think for Scout in particular, Scout was at a size where Scout was small enough to be flexible and nimble to sort of embrace some of the new paradigms that were happening, but also large enough that we had an infrastructure already in place that we were able to do these things. So, we were the Goldilocks size of comic publishers, I think, for the pandemic. So it was nice for us. And we just started trying a lot of new things. We started doing a lot more self-distribution directly to comic book shops, because when Diamond closed down, we didn't want to be reliant on them. So we set up a direct distribution system. So stores, and a lot of them have sort of maintained that channel, could get their books directly from Scout. Also, right around the same time with the pandemic, DC left Diamond and they moved to Lunar. And so Scout immediately said, "Hey, Lunar, would you be up for having us as well?" Because I think this is a good thing for any one publisher, and this is a good lesson for business in general. You don't ever want to put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, right? So if you just have one distribution channel and something happens to that distribution channel, your company can be in a lot of trouble, and especially when we're talking about margins that are as small as the direct market margins. So you need to navigate that space and just be always thinking forward. What are new opportunities? And I'll give a big shout out to James Hake, who's the president of Scout, because he's always been very forward thinking with thoughts about distribution and making sure that that Scout is wherever people want them to be. And I think the other thing was, DC moved from Diamond to Lunar. So it just went to a different track. This was the new exclusive home for DC versus the old exclusive home. Scout said, hey, we'd love to have DC distribute us as well. Lunar distribute us as well. So you could get Scout from Diamond, you could get Scout from Lunar, you could get Scout directly from Scout. When Whatnot popped up in this last year, Scout wanted to be part of that stream as well. So I think, I think the lesson is to newer publishers is to embrace all the different channels and don't get so stuck on the paradigms of how things have been done, because those are not great paradigms. The industry does not have great margins because of the way it's been set up in the past. And I think if you're a new creator, then I would specifically say embrace crowdfunding. Embrace that as a way to build your audience before you come to a publisher that's going to put you out into the direct market. That crowdfunding may even be more lucrative for you than the direct market. In fact, very often it is. And so, one gets you to a broader audience, but one puts more money in your pocket so you can make your book. Again, why not do both?
So for the audience standpoint, is there a functional difference between having distribution through Scout or having it through Luna or Diamond? Or from the comic book store level, does it change for them?
For the comic book shops, no. I mean, it really comes down to what form they want to fill out, right? And they can either fill out Lunar's order form, they can fill out Diamond's order form, they can fill out Scout's order form. The discounts may be a little bit different depending on which place you're ordering from, but that depends on the store and what deal they have with those distributors. Sometimes it's about how many books overall they order. And, if it's a larger store, it might make sense for them to order from a particular distributor because of, the number of DC books that they order every month makes that a cheaper channel for them. So we, again, want just to provide flexibility, whatever makes sense for the distributor. And then the same thing with those who order directly from Scout.
So currently you're writing Glarion, which is a spinoff of White Ash comic book. Now that's being crowdfunded, or was just completed crowdfunding on Kickstarter. So for Scout, how does the crowdfunding work? Is it, if it's something that's crowdfunded like Glarion, can they still then get it from regular channels, or once the window closes on the campaign, the access is lost?
Well, I think it's so specifically to address that, to address Glarien, to address White Ash, things that creators who are at Scout do on Kickstarter, Scout lets them do that first. And then when that is finished, then Scout will put it out into the direct market. And so it's almost like looking at a film. Sometimes a studio will split the international and the domestic revenues, and one company will be responsible for distributing one and the other. So, I've helped write the crowdfunding guidelines for Scout, and it's about trying to create something that's unique for both markets, whether it's a format, whether, what's going on in the direct market's more of what's going on in the Kickstarter market is more of a premium, like a larger oversized book. Maybe it's a hardcover that then Scout puts out as floppies afterwards. Just so each is its own unique product. But, I often say to creators, crowdfund sign a deal, go crowdfund your book, make your money, make sure it's done. Because like the other difference in terms of expectation between the direct market and say the Kickstarter market is, I could do an issue of Glarion every year, a 40-page issue, a 32-page issue, and people would come back a year later. If you're going to release something in the direct market that came out 1 year between issues, unless it's Miracle Man, the return, like no one's waiting that long for a monthly book. They don't want to wait for a serialized book a month at a time. But in the Kickstarter market, they're willing to wait 6 months to a year because it's just a different paradigm. It's a different market. So like the thought is they're different markets. Give them something different, even if the bulk of it is the same thing.
No, I agree 100%. I remember back in the 90s with Image, you had books like Pit, you had books like the Extreme comic books where, the next issue came out a year or two later. You couldn't remember when it came out. People didn't remember what it was. They're like, wait, what is this again? Oh, and the storyline would be lost. Yeah, it doesn't work on the direct market whatsoever from experience.
Yeah, well, but that said, like in the Kickstarter market, you can grow an audience there by doing 2 to 3 Kickstarter launches a year,
Mm.
right? And so like for me with a series like Glarien, that is now rivaling numbers that we would be able to get in the direct market through Kickstarter. And the audience for that grew from issue 1 to issue 2, which is really the opposite of what usually happens in the direct market, even though it was 10 months between issues.
Right.
So it's a totally different beast that you need to sort of understand as a creator.
So why did you decide to expand the White Ash world of White Ash with Glarion? And why was Glarion a great character to expand upon?
Well, so White Ash. I mean, for those of people who are coming new to your show, I mean, the quick pitch is Romeo and Juliet meets Lord of the Rings in rural Pennsylvania. Or imagine the guys from Supernatural got stuck in Riverdale, but rather than battling demons from hell, they had to deal with the worst of Mordor. It's grounded fantasy in a coal mining town, but it's set present day, and it's a really big story, and that's one of the reasons why I also take it to Kickstarter, because I'm looking to have this be sustained for a long time. It's plotted out for about 60 issues. Yeah, and we're right now we're about 3 issues into the second arc of the series. And I'm the kind of writer who likes to plot everything out. I like to go backwards, like to go forwards. I like to know how we got to the moment where the story that we're telling takes place. So I know where White Ash is going to go, but I also know how we got there. And a lot of how White Ash got there is set in the past in Elfheim, and it's really the story of Glarion, who is, is the mother of one of the main characters of White Ash. So we're seeing her past, and so she was a very popular character in the bits that she's had in White Ash. So that kind of motivated expanding her a little bit more. But the narrative of White Ash itself is really predicated on the relationship between, Glarion and Thane, and how all of that developed in the past that leads us to this point in the future. So, if you watch a show like Lost, where you're doing all the flashbacks and they add much more, all that depth for you to understand what's going on in current time, that's kind of what we're doing right now with this Glarien miniseries. And I have at least another 2 that we're going to do in the future after this one. And to be able to tell that chunk of story in the past, so it gives you better context for what's happening right now.
So it's being penciled by, probably get the name wrong and I apologize, Romina Marinelli?
Think it's Morinelli.
Morinelli?
I'll be completely honest. As someone who I've had interactions with that have been exclusively online, going back and forth, sure. All I know is
a weird
Romina
world.
She is an amazing artist who I love collaborating with, but we've never spoken. So I assume her English is good based on the correspondence we have. But you never know when you're working with an artist whether they're running everything through Google Translate. At some point, I for sure will. We're going to bring her over for a convention, I think, in the future. But she is just a joy to collaborate with, and has made this character her own. And so yeah.
Like I said, the internet, it creates a weird world where you have these long-standing relationships built with your co-people workers you've never actually spoken to, and that just seems to be the nature of the internet.
Yeah, for sure. Like I had worked with Connor Hughes, who's the main penciler of White Ash, for 2 years before we had actually met in person. And we met at San Diego Comic-Con when we put a White Ash booth up. 2000, I think it was 2018. Like, yeah, oh, it's nice to meet you in person. So it is really nice that we live in an age where you can assemble these teams. And our colorist on White Ash, and he also does some of the color work on Glarien, is Finn Crown. He's out of Scotland. So I've talked to Finn a couple of times on the phone, but mostly we've just corresponded via direct message and emails for 5 years now.
So how does Romina's work give life to your ideas and words? And has your story changed or altered, or the concept at all, to work because of Romina's talents, or where Romina, its strengths are, and things of that nature?
Um, it's interesting because I think every artist that you work with there's sort of an ebb and flow. I know with Connor, um, he is so detailed in his backgrounds. Sometimes his backgrounds inspire new story ideas. Uh, I think Marina, the her great strength is the posing and the acting.
Mm,
So it helps me bring humanity to the characters working with her.
mm,
And the longer that we've worked together, the more real, as a writer, you always feel like these characters real to me? And hopefully they are. But I really, to me, I think I understand the characters I'm writing better because of working with her and
mm,
seeing how she views them. And I think, it's great anytime that you're doing a story. And I mean, Glarion basically is two women. It follows a woman in 1970s New York City who's having visions of being this elf warrior from 3,000 years ago. And so we're telling basically the Glarion's origin story through the eyes of Rachel, this young woman in 1970s New York City. Uh, and so we're going back and forth between these two timelines. And those stories are going to come together over the course of the 5-issue miniseries, and you'll see how these women are connected. I've grown to, so what I was going to say is I think anytime that you have a book that has two female leads, and they're the two main leads, it's great when you are not just a male-driven team.
mm.
I think especially when it comes to, so it's great to have her take on the characters, on the posing, on where the camera is placed. All of these things I think are greatly enhanced by her being on the project and adding some estrogen to to the endeavor and
Right.
making sure that we're telling a balanced story.
So
So
what makes Rachel the ideal audience surrogate to for the audience to get access into the world of White Ash and Glarion? And in your opinion, how does Rachel's point of view affect how we view Glarion?
well, I think the thing that connects these two women is a sense of loss. They've both just had a traumatic event happen in their lives. For Glarion, she's at that age when the book opens where she feels like she's invulnerable. It's like
Mm,
that period when we're like 20, 21, where you feel like you can do no wrong and you know everything, right?
yeah.
And as we get older, you kind of realize, ooh, you know what? Maybe I may have overstepped there. I'm going to get there eventually, hopefully. But
Right.
and so it's that sense of immortality that basically causes the death of Glarion's lover. And so there's a personal sense of loss and responsibility for her right there, whereas Rachel's also just lost a child, and so you have a woman who's dealing with tragedy, which I think for me with fantasy, like I love Tolkien. I love Lord of the Rings. I love Terry Brooks. I love high fantasy, but I'm not going to try to out Tolkien.
Mm,
You can people can go crazy with their world building and trying to create these huge universes. But what I can do, and I came from a place where originally I was writing romantic comedies, is I can find characters that you can relate to, that you can care about, universal experiences,
mm,
and use those characters as a way to bring you in to my fantasy world. And I think what having, Rachel, who's dealing with with a real life trauma that everyone can relate to, um, gives you an end point into the series that she can take you in. And and yeah, if any of us started and it opens with her seeing a therapist and she doesn't know why and she's questioning her own sanity. So these are all relatable things where if you started having visions of being an elf warrior from 3,000 years ago, questions would be to all kind of probably ask ourselves, am I nuts? Is this, what is going on here? And so then it also seeds a question of what is going on here. And I think anytime that early on you can put a question in a reader's mind that they do want to see the answer to,
Mm.
then you're going to have more leeway to tell your story, because they already want to know that answer, and so they're going to go with you for the until the story really kicks in, because they already have a question that they need the answer to.
I will say though, if you're gonna have dreams, at least those are fun, interesting dreams to have. It's better than the normal ones we tend to have. It's like I'm flying or floating or falling. It's like I'm a freaking elf warrior. That's actually a pretty good one if you're gonna be stuck in a loop dream.
Right, and that sells comic books, right?
Right.
The dream where you're falling, and then someone opens up with a psychiatrist's office talking about the dream she had last night where she fell, and the psychiatrist's like, really? Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so but for sure. But like for me, it's about finding grounded endpoints into the high fantasy. And the same thing happens in White Ash, where we start with a young man who's also at that crossroads of life where he's going to go off to college, and he doesn't want to be a coal miner like his father. He's like, hey dad, I'm out of town because the last thing I want to be is a miner. And then, there's an accident at the coal mine, which keeps him in town for a couple of days, and he meets this young woman, and he starts going down this path where he's going to find out who he really is, what his legacy actually is. And then he has to sort of make that choice that we all do, where are you going to forge your own path? Are you going to follow in the footsteps of your parents? It's a messy thing growing up and figuring out who you are. And I think too many of us right off the bat think, no, that's just me. But it's never just you, right? Like there's all these things that have influenced who you are to become, and separating what is you from the influences and what your expectations are. That's growing up. And I think that's a fascinating thing that we can all relate to. And so again, it gives people an endpoint to be able to understand what's going on.
So the Rachel part of the story, you said it's set at 1971 New York. So why that point in time? What is it about 71 New York as a backdrop, as a character of its as in its own right, that you felt it's compelling and you wanted to set it there?
Well, there's a couple things. There's a specific story point that has not been revealed yet, that I can't get into exactly why it's 1971 summer of exactly. There is a historical event that I'm tying some of this to, but I also like the grittiness of the backdrop, a little bit of that Taxi Driver vibe. And I think it contrasts really nicely. Like what contrasts more with beautiful, dreamy elf-likeness in nature than 1970s New York City, right? Like you can't have two more opposites. You've got the big high rises, and you've got the filth, and you've got the dirt, and you've got like the grimy subways. And then you have the elves riding on horses through beautiful countrysides, right? Like really, as contrasts go, that was part of it. But there's also a historical event that we're going to be tying into.
That sounds awesome. There's a quote I want to read that you stated and build a question off of. Okay.
Sure, for sure.
So the quote that you stated is, one of the themes that runs through White Ash is, as much as we try to forge our own unique path in life, the shadow of those who came before us hangs heavy. So how are both Rachel and Glarion impacted by their past, and how will their actions impact the future generations that come after?
Well, I think with Rachel and Glarion, it's right now, it's a little bit about their immediate past, right? So, Rachel is a couple of months after a miscarriage. And so for her, it's that traumatic event. And there was a fire at the hospital that she worked at. And so all of that trauma that she's trying to deal with is shaping who she was, who she's going to become going forward. It sort of, there was a physical fire, but also it's the metaphysical fire of that, of this period in her life that's going to forge something new. So for Glarien, again, it's this time in life where she is casting off a bit of that, that invulnerability as she's having to embrace some adult responsibilities. And how do you carry that weight? Are you going to become a productive member of society? Are you going to blow it off? Like, how do you handle responsibility when you finally have to wear the mantle of responsibility? Because I think so many, kids don't know. I mean, I have two of my own, and they have no idea like how easy life is for them at the moment. even though they complain about their homework and, oh my goodness, this kid at school. And
Yeah.
it's like responsibility is something that just floats by. But at some point, we all reach sort of this wall, and it's like, okay, how am I going to wear responsibility going forward? And, what's my relationship with it? And so I think, for Glarion, her origin story is a little bit about her understanding her relationship with responsibility.
So for people who are interested in Glarion, how familiar do they need to be with White Ash to enjoy Glarion?
So I try to do everything as a jumping on point for new readers. So the first arc of White Ash, which was just collected as a trade, you get in bookstores, it's a story. And then if you just were to pick it up with the next arc, it's built as a jumping on point for going forward. Even though it's a continuous story, I try to say, okay, this is where you can come in. Glarion is also designed to be a standalone miniseries. So if you just like high fantasy, beautiful elves, gritty New York City, like that kind of vibe. Game of Thrones meets Taxi Driver. If you want to sort of mash some things together in your head, then you can just do this. And if you really like the world that's being built there, then you can go check out White Ash and see where else it goes.
So, like I said, issue 2 just completed a very successful Kickstarter. I think I saw you guys hit $65,000, which is extremely impressive for any campaign. So congrats.
Thank you.
When can we expect issue 3 to hit Kickstarter?
It'll be sometime next year. As much as I would love to roll this out every 2 or 3 months, it's a discussion with artists and making sure that things work with their scheduling. And I've been very fortunate to work with some incredible artists, but the last thing I want to do is rush their work because what I'm getting is so good. So I wish I could get 3 to 5 pages a week. That's not what's currently happening. So the story is moving a little bit slower than I would like, but it's so good. So it's worth the wait. That's what I'll say. And it seems like the audience, which has been growing, and I, you're always happy to raise money because that lets you make the book. But I'm just as happy that it was over 1,700 backers for the second issue, which in terms of single issues on Kickstarter is about as big as it gets. So it's nice to see like the fan base coming out and finding new people, and everyone's flocking to the book for the story. There's plenty of other things you can flock to Kickstarter for, but people are coming to Glarien for the story.
Well, like I said, it's a beautiful looking comic book. It's I really enjoyed it, and I want to thank you so much for talking with me.
I would love to. Thank you so much. You too.